In the world of gaming, there are two distinct periods, BC and AC, before Crysis and after Crysis. Until the end of 2007, games were evolving in a more or less predictable way, with every new game marginally improving upon its predecessors. Graphics, sounds, gameplay, story ideas. All of the aspects of a game were evolving, but slowly. Of course, every now and then there would be a title that pushed the limits of game making in one way or the other, but those were quite rare, quite hard to make, and require exceptional talent and impressive funding. Games like Doom, Half-Life 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, Fear, Halo, and World of Warcraft, among others, all left their mark in gaming history, be it for incredible stories, insanely immersive world building, stellar gameplay, or unique mechanics. But all of those games were limited in one way or another, some by lack of ambition, some by small budgets, and others were dragged down by limitations of the technology of their time. Graphics especially was a stagnant point for the longest time. With every platform or hardware generation, there would be graphical improvement overall, but at the same time, every platform or generation only had very few accessible, easy to work with, and capable graphical engines. Because developing your own unique graphics engine is a massive project, most developers simply use what already existed. This led to a massive amount of games, basically looking almost the same, be it Source, Zero Engine, Havoc, ID Tech, Aurora, or Unreal Engine. All of them were mainstream at one point or another, and the only graphical improvements across the industry were minor updates to these engines, adding small details from version to version, and maybe a new feature or two every few update cycles. From one point of view, it's understandable. Despite it being literally what you look at all the time, graphics don't really matter. A game with good gameplay, good sound, and an amazing story won't be knocked down too much if it has bad graphics. And a terrible game that's terrible in every way but looks great will never be elevated simply because of the stellar visuals. But in 2007, Crysis emerged from the industrial depths of Germany to challenge this notion and the technology itself, to melt all the silicon it could get its futuristic nano claws on, and to become the standard of performance against which hardware would be measured for decades to come. Crytek had already astonished everyone back in 2004 with the release of their incredible tech demo game Far Cry, but Crysis was meant to be something entirely different. The hype surrounding the game and its absolutely monstrous graphics was insane, and for years and years before the release, every time a screenshot or a video would be released, it just looked like something out of this world, something entirely new and absolutely unique. Crysis truly looked like a glance at a very distant future. To some extent, it did live up to it. Even now, at the end of 2024, the ability to run Crysis is still an important measure of performance and a sign of great engineering, be it in the bleeding-edge dream-level systems or in cheap DIY hobbyist computer environments. Crysis was bigger, more beautiful, and much more detailed than anything that has ever existed before. It was a glimpse at the future, at what games would look like in 5, 10, 15 years on from 2007. One could argue even now, 17 years removed from release, we're still not entirely there. But just like the games before it, Crysis was compromised. Beyond the immense visuals, Crysis was barely skin deep. In the pursuit of the most advanced graphics the world has ever seen, it lost everything: the story, gameplay, character development, and plot progression. In the same year as BioShock that revolutionized storytelling, Call of Duty 4 that changed the direction of the entire FPS genre, Half-Life 2 Episode 2 that showed the entire planet what basically perfect physics system and flawless in-game plot progression is supposed to look like, Mass Effect that demonstrated the peak of world building, and Uncharted that captured everyone's attention with its incredible gameplay. All Crysis had going for it was pure technological advantage and insane graphics. It still relied on pre-rendered and engine cutscenes, had big and beautiful, but mostly empty maps and pretty unimpressive action. Despite featuring some of the biggest open-world levels at the time, there was no reason to explore them. Every map featured anywhere from hundreds to thousands of interactive objects, but there was no reason to interact with any of them. All of this made maps feel almost empty and completely lifeless, even if they were filled with objects and NPCs. So many elements of gameplay were sacrificed for pure graphical fidelity that majority of the time Crysis felt more like a very, very long playable tech demo, and it never felt like an actual game. Even at the best moments, there was still this lingering feeling that this wasn't a real game, just some experiment that came about simply because some game developers decided to see how far they could push computer hardware to generate the maximum visual fidelity possible. Visual fidelity that only a chosen few could even experience. For absolute majority of gamers at the time, Crysis was not only ugly, but outright unlaunchable, as hardware requirements were insanely high. But even despite all its flaws, Crysis still left a massive mark on the history of games, be it directly or not. Garnering significant critical acclaim, selling 3 million units, and allegedly being pirated to the tune of 60 million copies or even more, Crysis became a sensation in the computer industry. So when in 2009 Crytek announced the sequel, Crysis 2, nobody was surprised. The sequel was supposed to improve on every single aspect of the original. It was meant to look even better, sound even grander, have a much more interesting story, and be significantly more accessible and streamlined, in order to allow console players to enjoy the game alongside regular PC gamers. While there were doubts whether Crytek could achieve everything they aimed for within one sequel, especially the goal to bring Crysis to the console to compete with already established Xbox and PlayStation giants like Halo, Battlefield, and Call of Duty, the biggest questions on everyone's mind were what sci-fi hardware would be needed to run Crysis 2 at its full power, and what was sacrificed to create the most technologically advanced game in the world. That would both show the absolute limits of most powerful modern PC hardware of the day, but would also run on multiple console platforms that by the time of the release would be 5 to 6 years old already. Well, let's find out if they managed to do it. Any game is only as good as its story, and the story in Crysis 2 is incredibly important and is much more developed than it was in the original Crysis, so I figured it's the best place to start. Keep in mind, this involves a massive amount of spoilers for all the games, so consider yourself warned. If you wish to skip the story summaries, you can click this timecode in the description. Continuing in 3, 2, 1. Crysis 2 is almost a direct sequel to the original Crysis and Warhead, so a recap is probably in order, in case you forgot what happens there. The first Crysis takes place in 2020. A team of archaeologists discover remains of an ancient, mysterious alien civilization on Lingshan Islands, a fictional archipelago of islands off the coast of the Philippines. Said archaeologists are suddenly attacked by Korean forces and are taken hostage. To save them, the United States dispatched 3 teams of Nanosuit soldiers to the Lingshan Islands to save the archaeologists and defeat the Korean forces. Raptor Team, Eagle Team, and Hawk Team. Raptor Team is the main one. All of the important people in the Crysis story come from here. Its leader, Prophet, the playable character Nomad, and Psycho, who acts as support in Crysis, but is the playable character in Crysis Warhead. Hawk and Eagle teams are support teams, operating elsewhere on the islands. Anyway, Raptor Team deploys and travels throughout the island, on the way losing some unimportant members, saving some of the archaeologists, battling Korean forces, and eventually discover some of the secrets about the alien civilization, at that time unnamed, but now known as Ceph. Along the way, Prophet is taken by the Ceph, while Psycho and Nomad separate and go to different sides of the island on their own objectives. Unfortunately, eventually the central Ceph hive is awakened and unleash their fury onto the Lingshan Islands, flash freezing them and every living thing nearby. Nomad even gets to travel through the Ceph megastructure within the central Lingshan mountain, experiencing various gravitational phenomena. At the same time, Prophet has his own mysterious adventure in a different part of the mountain that's never revealed in the game, but is the story that takes place in Crysis comic. Eventually, Raptor Team escapes the Ceph mountain, with Prophet, Nomad, and Psycho taking part in several battles around the island at the same time, before making their last stand on an aircraft carrier out in the sea. The US Army tries to nuke the island to kill all the Ceph, ignoring the pleas of Dr. Rosenthal, the rescued archaeologist, that the nuclear explosion will only make the Ceph stronger. Her pleas are completely ignored, and nuke is launched, but shortly before that, Prophet steals an aircraft and returns to the island to search for more information on how to defeat Ceph. As expected, the nuke doesn't kill the aliens, they just absorb the energy from the explosion, and the island-wide sphere of cold expands exponentially, freezing everything, while the aircraft carrier itself and the fleet around it get attacked by hordes of Ceph, defeating waves of regular Ceph. Eventually, Nomad and Psycho are attacked by the alien mothership. Through massive effort, they manage to destroy the spacecraft, but the aircraft carrier gets destroyed along with the mothership and sinks, so Nomad and Psycho fly back to the island to find Prophet. And that's where the first game ends. To say there are unanswered questions and unexplained mysteries is an understatement of the highest order. The first game basically doesn't explain anything at all, and all the important lore is only revealed in the Crysis comic, actually published after the release of Crysis 2, to bridge all the storylines. But more importantly, it reveals much more about the aliens. In fact, during the first game, aliens are never actually named. According to the in-universe timeline, they're only named Ceph in the comic after the events of Crysis. Ceph is short for cephalopods, since the aliens are somewhat aquatic in nature. The comic also explains why the aliens killed Aztec and Jester, and why they failed to kill the Prophet and how he escaped. Turns out Nanosuit technology isn't a human invention. Rather, it has been stolen and adapted from Ceph, and the one Ceph that killed Aztec and Jester wasn't actually trying to kill them, but rather integrate with them. Jacob Hargreave was one of the people who found the Ceph technology, and is also one of the original creators of the Nanosuit, basing it on that technology. He was also the one who recruited Prophet, gave him the suit, and sent him to the Lingshan Islands to see how the Ceph would react to nanosuits. Aliens saw nanosuits as extensions of themselves. That's why it took long enough to interact with the Prophet that he managed to escape after capture. During his escape, Prophet ran into a Korean soldier inside the alien metastructure, and here even more information is revealed. Korean soldier explains that Koreans had nanosuit for way longer than everyone expected, and they weren't stolen from the US. They actually developed it themselves. And not only that, Korean soldiers who used nanosuits were having dreams of the alien metastructure, hence why they were trying to get inside. And the reason why Korean nano soldiers couldn't stack up to Nomad in Crysis was not because their suits were cheap copies, as everyone thought, but simply because on Lingshan Islands their suits caused side effects. Some nano soldiers got slower, some lost the will to fight, some went crazy. The islands in proximity to aliens made those suits unreliable and soldiers wearing them less effective. That's the only reason Nomad managed to defeat so many of them during his travels. The comic also explains how Prophet's suit was damaged and where he got the alien shard weapon. Turns out he found it inside the alien metastructure, held by some long-deceased alien, possibly a second alien species besides the Ceph. And Prophet's suit was damaged when he walked through an alien portal and was sent back in time. Ceph didn't follow him, so it's actually possible the alien portal was created by some other civilization, not the Ceph. Civilization that can use time travel. That's right, Crysis has time travel. Some time travel shenanigans follow, including Prophet sending a message to himself in the past, guiding his earlier version through the events. Shortly following that, the team gets captured by the CIA, with Helena Rosenthal dying in the shootout and Nomad is gravely injured. CIA then torture them, trying to get information, but Prophet and Psycho are hit by the shockwave of Morrison's nuke, and resulting EMP knocks out the power to their nanochairs, allowing them to escape. As they're escaping, someone shoots a rocket at them, and Nomad, already on the brink of death, jumps in front of it to protect Psycho and Prophet. Yes, the protagonist of the first game, the very first nanosoldier we ever get to play, gets killed in what is basically off-screen remark in a comic not that many people know about. Or, well, at least that's what the comic indicates. There are a few hints in Crysis 3 that Nomad might have survived, but that's inconclusive at best. Anyway, Psycho and Prophet leave Lingshan Islands and head to New York to meet with Hargreave to get some answers. And the comic ends here. As much information as it provides, it still leaves some loose ends and unanswered questions. But finally, let's get to the sequel. Crysis 2 takes place in 2023, 3 years after the events in the original Crysis. The alien race, Ceph, that was uncovered in Lingshan Islands, is now a worldwide threat, and New York City is the core of the invasion. There's also an alien-engineered disease called the Manhattan virus spreading through the city as alien spores, which upon infection causes rapid cellular breakdown and turns any biological matter into just a mess of cells. Some people ran, others were evacuated, but the rest either caught the disease or got killed by Ceph. Death, destruction, chaos, and panic are everywhere. Society is on the brink of complete collapse. In a bizarre twist, on some level it's quite similar to how everyone reacted to COVID-19 a few years ago. Manhattan is especially heavily hit by all this mess and has been placed under martial law, policed by private corporation, crime and enforcement, and logistics. Or Cell. Cell was hired by the US Department of Defense to assist in getting Manhattan under control and battle the virus, but they failed to find a cure, and since there's barely anyone left alive around there, Cell are basically unmonitored and are working on their own agenda. Due to failure to cure the virus, Cell soldiers are ordered to shoot everyone on sight, and they really take it to the heart, shooting everyone, civilians, soldiers they encounter, and especially Alcatraz. So if you're a civilian in Manhattan, you've got a choice: die to Ceph, die to the virus, or die to Cell. Fun times all around. Crysis 2 begins on a submarine, in a Force Recon Marine unit sent to New York City to find and extract Dr. Nathan Gould, who supposedly has information on Ceph and how to fight them. Out of the entire unit, only 2 members actually matter: Alcatraz, the main playable character, and Chino, some dude who we meet here and like 4 times later in the story. The rest of the unit is expendable. Unexpectedly, the sub gets attacked by a missile and is destroyed, while Alcatraz manages to miraculously escape a sure death. Out of nowhere, a Ceph gunship appears and kills everyone left alive after the sub explosion, and even almost kills Alcatraz, but Prophet comes in at the clutch moment and destroys the gunship. However, Alcatraz is heavily injured and like 2 steps from death. Prophet himself is infected with the Manhattan virus, so he's basically spent. He'll die soon, but Gould still needs help. So the only actual choice the Prophet has is to give Alcatraz his nanosuit to save his life and pass on his mission to him. But because suits are symbiotically linked to the users and won't accept a new host as long as the original one is alive, Prophet ends himself to allow Alcatraz to become the new host of a nanosuit. So Alcatraz awakens already linked to the suit, with all that remains of the Prophet being a corpse lying nearby, a dropped gun, and a pre-recorded message. Almost immediately, Alcatraz is contacted by Nathan Gould, who mistakes him for Prophet, since Alcatraz is now wearing Prophet's nanosuit. Gould is desperate, as Cell are closing in and he's completely alone, so he urges Alcatraz to hurry up. Now you might think that Alcatraz could actually tell Gould he's not the Prophet, but later we find out Alcatraz is basically just an assembly of flesh and bones. He's injured beyond saving, including collapsed lungs so he can't make a sound. The nanosuit is literally the only thing keeping him alive and going. It is the body, while Alcatraz himself is basically just a source of consciousness for the suit. So Alcatraz is mute for the entire game. Anyway, Alcatraz is Gold's only hope of survival, and Gold is vital in the fight against Ceph, so we gotta save him. Alcatraz takes a short stroll through the decimated city, destroys some cell forces. We get to see his Ceph airship, which honestly looks really damn cool. Then some more unaliving later, we actually witness a Ceph ship being blown to Kingdom Come by some cell forces. The ship crashes nearby, and Gold thinks it's a great opportunity to gather some alien tissue samples to maybe find a cure for Manhattan virus. So we're going on a detour to find the ship and scoop up some alien DNA. This is where we get introduced to the actual Ceph aliens, all close and personal-like. Ceph are infinitely more interesting than they were in the first Crysis, and are a much bigger threat now. Whereas in the original Crysis, they all looked like dark floating tentacly squids, with there only being a few different variations that all looked boring and uninteresting. This time around they're much more menacing, with aggressive sharp lines in the design, glowing eyes, and razor claws. A definite improvement. Despite that, Alcatraz is still just too much of a Sigma male for these walking squids, so we waste them without issues. This is also where another interesting aspect of Crysis 2 is introduced: Nanosuit upgrades. By gathering alien DNA, Nanosuit can be upgraded in a few interesting ways and customized to personal liking, making Alcatraz truly one-of-a-kind Doomslayer. Gathering the alien DNA also triggers mysterious additional processes within deep layers of the Nanosuit that are not explained at this time, but surely will be of a massive importance later. But the suit is definitely reacting to all this new alien material Alcatraz is gathering, and is throwing all kinds of weird readings that even Gold can't explain. Carrying on towards Gold, an interesting detail is revealed. Tara Strickland, the daughter of certified badass Major Strickland from the first Crysis, is in New York, and apparently she's working with Cell. At present time, this fact doesn't mean much, but it will become a very important detail later. At the same time, we also learn of the main antagonist of the game, at least for now, Commander Lockhart. While he's presented as basically a one-dimensional bad guy, he's actually a very complex character. It's not revealed now, but Lockhart is probably the most honorable character in the entire game, and in any other circumstance he would be a war hero, but here, he's just a bad guy. From the very start, him and Tara Strickland are at odds with each other, with both of them supposedly working for Jacob Hargreave. But while Tara seems to respect his wishes somewhat and appears to work on furthering his goals, Lockhart eventually grows to hate Prophet for slaughtering his men all over Manhattan. He also has a pre-existing hate for nanosuits, since his nephew supposedly died in the program. Eventually, Lockhart abandons all notion of capturing Prophet and instead aims to kill him at the first possible opportunity to get his revenge. But at least at the start, all he cares about are lives of his men. One has to respect that. Shortly after this, Gold escapes his current base and relocates to a nearby apartment. But in his rush to escape Cell soldiers, he left information about his whereabouts on a server in his lab, so Alcatraz is assigned to rush there and destroy the data before Cell could pinpoint Gold's exact location. Alcatraz assaults the dock where Gold's lab is located and succeeds in destroying the servers. But this is just the start of his problems. Cell still attempt to kill Alcatraz right here and now, so he has to battle his way out. Of course, Alcatraz being Alcatraz, he survives the ordeal with minimal issues, and proceeds to meet up with Gold in an apartment nearby. Entering the Nanosuit cradle, Alcatraz gets connected to the system, and this is where Gold finds out who Alcatraz really is. And this is where Alcatraz's story would almost end, as Gold prepared to dome him right then and there. But the recording of Prophet plays just in the nick of time. Gold is shaken up by the footage and releases Alcatraz. This is where another Lord dump takes place. Apparently, Gold was working on a way to cure the Manhattan virus, and Prophet was supposed to safely get him out of the city. The Marines were coming to help them, before being wiped out by the Ceph. Oh yeah, and Gold affirms the fact Ceph evolved from cephalopods. Calamari, as he calls it, It's also why later in the game human forces often refer to Ceph as squids. Anyway, apparently, the nanosuit Alcatraz is wearing is built out of some miracle self-repairing, semi-organic nano-weave material developed and patented by Hargreave Corporation. Gold also explains Prophet went rogue for a while after Hargreave recruited him and gave him the nanosuit, but after a while came back talking about stuff nobody really understood. And if that juicy tidbit wasn't enough, apparently there's a viral subroutine running in the deep layers of the nanosuit. The suit is actually running some self-replicating adapting code against a virus, developing a vaccine against the spore all on its own. It might be just a breakthrough Gold needed to fight the alien virus, but he can't decode the information. He needs more processing power. And the only place where that's possible is Hargreave's complex on the Roosevelt Island, called the Prism. That should be the next goal, but the scheming is cut short as Cell attack Gold's apartment. So Gold and Alcatraz have to postpone their searches for truth and try to escape. Alcatraz draws Cell's attention from Gold to give him time to escape and battles through several Cell foot soldiers before crashing through a window in pretty damn cool sequence, falling to the ground. Nanosuit protects him from most of the damage, but Alcatraz is still knocked out for a while. While he's out, Gold scans Cell's network and finds out Cell was ordered to take Alcatraz to a command post at Wall Street. Gold figures out they got a nanosuit cradle there with deep scan capacity. They need to investigate what's going on with the nanosuit, so Wall Street is the next goal. Waking up from a short nap, Alcatraz travels through the streets of Manhattan, battling both Cell and Ceph soldiers, destroying whole battalions of both. It's pretty damn good fun. Impressive locations, plenty of guns, ammo, and explosives make this trip really enjoyable. Before reaching the destination, Gold explains some things about Nanosuit. There's a reason it's so powerful. It's equipped with a whole suite of self-evolving biofeedback functions. It's the most complex and sophisticated piece of technology around, and Gold was the technician providing support for it. That's how he met Prophet and got close to him. Gold trusts Prophet's decision to put Alcatraz into the suit, even if he doesn't understand it. But scanning the suit with Deep Scan Cradle might just reveal the reason behind Prophet's decisions. Some more destruction and fighting later, Alcatraz manages to break into the vault where the cradle is. Gold is already here, and with the help of some random technician, they scan Alcatraz. The scan shows some pretty extensive damage. Heart, both lungs, ribs, chest, spine, sternum, basically everything is damaged. The only thing keeping Alcatraz alive is the nanosuit. And this is where another incredibly important yet seemingly insignificant remark is made. The nano-weave fabric from the suit is growing into Alcatraz's wounds. Before this fact could be acknowledged by anyone, Gold orders the technician to run a deep layer scan. This causes Alcatraz to briefly hallucinate a fragment of Prophet's memories, but the scan overloads the system and causes Nanosuit to send out a transmission. Almost immediately, Cell pinpoint the source of the transmission and break into the lab. Lockhart is finally caught up to them and lets his frustrations out first by knocking out Gold. He then enters the cradle chamber, and Alcatraz is like 2 seconds away from getting to Hillbilly Heaven, but Tara Strickland arrives just in time and orders Lockhart to stand down and capture Alcatraz instead of killing him. And for some reason, Lockhart goes with it. The dude who spends entire game up to this point hunting down Prophet and ignoring all orders from higher-ups surrenders control to Tara. It feels sort of weird. The situation isn't helped by the fact that at least in the Crysis 2 Remastered, Lockhart looks goddamn cross-eyed. It's so damn funny, it robs the whole situation of any tension. God only knows why does he look like that in Remaster, despite looking perfectly normal in the original Crysis 2. Anyway, Gold and Alcatraz are captured. Lockhart disables the nanosuit, and Cell are preparing to transport them to the Prism to Hargreave. Hargreave wants the suit, and Cell haven't been informed yet Prophet is dead, and dude in the suit is actually Alcatraz. Gold starts to speak up about it, but a convenient earthquake forces everyone to run out before he can make his point. Gould is taken by Tara and Lockhart, while Alcatraz is placed in a helicopter. But before they can fly away, an alien spire, likely drawn in by the transmission of the nanosuit, emerges, destroying the entire building and hitting the helicopter, causing Alcatraz to have a pretty damn painful crash. Considering the nanosuit was disabled and Alcatraz was already just a sack of blood and bones, that shit had to hurt like hell. Upon waking up, we get to see the effects of Ceph spores firsthand, as the spire releases a cloud of them and nearby Cell soldiers choke to death almost immediately. Alcatraz actually gets infected too, and actually even dies here, and has to be brought back by the suit's integrated defibrillator. Like, if you're not paying attention, the game is over right here and now. Assuming Alcatraz is brought back, some Ceph foot soldiers land nearby, and Alcatraz has to fight them off while Nanosuit reboots. Regardless of her skill though, Alcatraz still fades away. While he's out, Nanosuit actually manages to contain the Ceph infection within deep layers of itself and reboot. In fact, it does even more. The virus is actually analyzed and the suit begins evolving to become compatible with it. While all of this is happening, Alcatraz is hallucinating some of Prophet's memories again. It's revealed the hostage rescue mission in the first Crysis was only a cover-up, a secondary objective. In reality, it was Hargreave sending Prophet to the islands to gather data on the Ceph and having him report back. Hargreave already knew by that point of the threat that Ceph represented and that the human race was living on borrowed time and needed data about them. By the time Alcatraz wakes up, everyone around him is dead, and Ceph had begun a full-scale invasion of New York. Almost immediately, Jacob Hargreave himself contacts him. He doesn't say much now, but directs Alcatraz towards the heart of the infestation, cryptically hinting it's something there that Alcatraz needs. On the way, Hargreave explains quite a bit about Ceph and the virus. Apparently, the purpose of the toxic spores and the virus is to quickly and easily break down biomass into basically nothing, reducing environmental impact and allowing Ceph to clean up faster after they conquer a world. In fact, Hargreave has an almost weird fascination with Ceph methods, and at numerous points sounds impressed and quite excited at Ceph technology, their structures and terraforming capabilities. Weird stuff. As Alcatraz is making his way towards a nearby alien hive, Hargreave informs him the Department of Defense decided to blow up the Rawson flood barrier and flood the lower Manhattan in an attempt to flush out the Ceph. Essentially, they're going to try to drown some squids. Hargreave is right to call it an insanity, but regardless of his protests, it's going to happen, which means Alcatraz is short on time and has to hurry as much as possible. So Alcatraz rips and tears his way through some alien-infested subway tunnels, eventually ending up in the heart of Ceph terraforming efforts. Scattered around the area are spires, acting as spore conduits for the virus. According to Hargreave, the alien DNA that's merging with the nanosuit allows it to interface and destroy the spires. So that's what is going to happen next. Traveling and battling through several large areas, Alcatraz eventually manages to interface with all the spires, which causes the central hive structure to open up. Hargreave wants to see what Nanosuit will do, so Alcatraz enters the hive. They figure out Nanosuit is compatible with the virus, and there's an exchange of data between the hive and the Nanosuit. It's a massive step towards cure for the virus, but Alcatraz doesn't have time to celebrate. Hargreave informs him the bombers are in the air to blow up the flood barrier, and the city is about to be flooded. Alcatraz rushes to a helicopter Hargreave sent for him, but doesn't make it in time, and the massive flood wave washes him away, knocking him out. While that's happening, the suit analyzes the alien tissue absorbed in the hive and reaches 76% compatibility. There's only one step left until the antiviral vector is developed. Alcatraz awakes in Madison Square Park with a group of Marines nearby, sent to look for him by Gould. Together, They have to fight through Ceph-infested part to reach an extraction point further out. This section is really damn cool the first time you play it. There's a bunch of stuff to look at, like parts of the Statue of Liberty scattered everywhere, and some pretty intense and interesting fight arenas with Ceph dropping from all sides. It's nothing too special or exclusive, it's just a very well-designed linear action section. Alcatraz and the Marines fight through to nearby building, and Marines stay behind to hold off pursuing Ceph. While Alcatraz is sent out to support Delta Company further ahead, we're trying to evacuate under constant assault by Ceph. Several more firefights follow, before the exfil helicopter is shot down by the Ceph, and the group has to defend against several waves of Ceph assault while trying to survive. While doing that, Hargreave informs Alcatraz the Nanosuit is busy building a biocode bridge between human technology and the Cephs. This is crucial to cure the virus, so by any means necessary, Alcatraz has to survive. What follows is a scripted defense section. Alcatraz and Marines fight off regular Ceph infantry, a few heavy units, here called Devastators, and even a Ceph gunship by the end. But unlucky for them, Alcatraz has access to some of the most powerful weaponry in the game here. Everything from regular grenades and assault rifles, to swarm rocket launchers and heavy machine guns. So defense is basically a no issue. Ceph fall one by one. Almost as soon as the fight is over, the whole group is contacted by Hargreave. He reveals Alcatraz's nanosuit is evolving into a bioweapon against Ceph, but it needs a stabilizing agent to complete the process, so Alcatraz is directed to Hargreave Rash Building, with the rest of the group recruited to provide support. Fighting past several Ceph encampments, Alcatraz eventually blows his way into the building. But here a surprise awaits. Cell! And they finally went rogue. Hargreave attempts to talk sense into them, but they're completely out of his control now, so Alcatraz has no choice but to waste all of them. Proceeding further, he has to operate the access console, but here he's ambushed by the rest of the Cell squad, and apparently, this is the squad under Lockhart's command. Lockhart has finally given in to his rage. He's openly going full out against Alcatraz, and completely ignores Hargreave's pleas and calls for reason. Of course, Alcatraz is just too powerful, and the remains of Cell are swiftly destroyed. But Alcatraz can't finish his mission either. The front of the building starts shattering under immense pressure of water. And out of nowhere a Ceph machine appears and unleashes a shockwave, completely shattering the building and flooding everyone in it. Alcatraz is washed out of the building and finds himself near a destroyed sewer system. Taking a trip through, he emerges right in the middle of a fight between some Marines and the Ceph Walker called Pinger. This is the most powerful enemy in the entire game, but Alcatraz manages to blow it to oblivion. Colonel Barkley is overseeing evacuation efforts at a nearby station, and Alcatraz is recruited to help out. Of course, in Manhattan, you can't take 2 steps without stepping into a firefight, so Alcatraz is forced to help some Marines defend against Ceph gunships by enabling anti-air missile batteries. Gotta say, watching the gunships burn causes weird feelings of satisfaction. Might be just my homicidal tendencies towards squid aliens coming out. A few short but intense alien firefights follow with Alcatraz inflicting all kinds of violence onto the space calamari, but eventually he's assigned a real man's mission. Assist with blowing up a skyscraper to bring it down and block alien mortar fire, so civilians could be evacuated from the station. Alcatraz being Alcatraz, he smashes through an entire horde of Ceph to get to the building and prime the explosives, then smashes right the hell out to reach the detonator. At one point, he even comes close to getting his head crushed in by a devastator Ceph, but luckily, falling building pushes a train into the Ceph, somehow also avoiding cutting off Alcatraz's legs. Guess Alcatraz was just born under a lucky star or something, although knowing his condition, maybe not. Either way, evacuation of civilians is set to start immediately from the lower levels of the station, with Alcatraz running interference up top, slowing down any would-be pursuers. Gould is also here, trying to reason with Barkley, and have Alcatraz immediately be sent to the prism for further nanosuit scanning. But Barkley needs help with evacuation, and the Nanosuit is like the humanity's strongest weapon, so Alcatraz is assigned to defend the area while the trains loaded with civilians leave the station. As expected, stuff doesn't remain calm for long, and before you know it, the area is swarming with Ceph. This is another one of the scripted defense sections, and it's definitely impressive and cinematic. Ceph of all varieties come pouring in. Everything from regular cannon fodder to devastators and even a pinger. It's intense, enjoyable, and the abundance of weapons around the arena give it almost a sandbox-type feeling. It's just a festival of carnage straight from a Michael Bay movie. But it's not flawless. It's scripted in a pretty funny way. It seems the defense is unrelated to the amount of Ceph killed, and the waves of incoming Ceph are on a timer because both times I've played this section, I've somehow managed to destroy all the enemies before some arbitrary time limit was hit. So for an extended duration of time, it's just running around the area with nothing to do, nobody to shoot at and nothing to explore, just waiting for the next wave of enemies. It's one of the few times Crysis 2 feels unfinished or underdeveloped. Situations like this are definitely rare, much more infrequent than they were in the original Crysis, but still feels like with 4 years of development, stuff like this shouldn't happen. With all the Ceph destroyed, they decide instead to blow up a building nearby and drop it on the station to destroy everyone. Barkley sends a few vehicles to drive Alcatraz and the rest of the soldiers out, and just in time too. Crashing through the station, they get on the gas and boost out of there, but here some weird stuff happens. As they're escaping, a man flags them down asking for help. His wife is stuck under some debris and can't get out. Without help, they'll be dead in a few seconds. But Alcatraz, who is wearing a futuristic self-evolving alien technology-based nanosuit with large energy pool and super speed and super strength capabilities, just stands around staring at the dude, then the wife, then the falling building for almost half a minute, then everyone drives off leaving the civilians to die. Like, what was the point of this scene? The whole action is too slow and takes too long for there to be an impression of immediate danger, and the whole scene makes Alcatraz just look like a total dick. If this was placed earlier in the game, sure, there would be an excuse Alcatraz is inexperienced with the suit and doesn't know what it can do, but here, there is just no excuse. At this stage in the game, it would have taken Alcatraz maybe 10 seconds to jump down, take 2 leaps to the crushed woman, rip the beam off of her, grab her, then jump out. By the time the building started to really fall down, Alcatraz could have jogged an entire block carrying the woman on his shoulders. Let me remind you that by this point in the game, Alcatraz has either fallen or jumped down significant heights, ran around for quite some time, absorbed tons of damage from weapons fire, explosions, and other stuff, defeated multiple truck-sized aliens, and survived getting thrown out of multiple buildings. His durability is off the charts, and the player has already experienced the speed and large energy pool of the nanosuit. What a completely useless scene. I'm not sure if it's poor writing or poor directing, or maybe a touch of that in the other, but it adds nothing to the story at all. Just makes Alcatraz look like an idiot, an egotistical dick, or both. Anyway, the couple dies, and everyone in the car happily carries on with the evacuation. Everyone left alive is getting lifted out of a nearby evac site, but Ceph are closing in, so Alcatraz has to help defend the site. And it's the third major defense section within like an hour of gameplay. I'm not saying they ran out of ideas by this point, but it does kind of stink that way. A couple of regular Ceph waves and several devastators are wiped out by Alcatraz with like no difficulty, so they decide to send a pinger. But since there's an entire arsenal of guns and explosives scattered around the area, pinger gets destroyed without any problems. The group prepares to evacuate, but are stopped when unexpectedly Ceph's spore spire rises out of the ground nearby. Everything seems pretty dire, but suddenly the group is contacted by Hargreave. According to him, the only way to survive is for Alcatraz to enter the spire and compromise the spore dispersal mechanism. The key is the nanosuit. As soon as Alcatraz enters the spire, somehow the suit communicates with it, compromising it. Alcatraz gets pushed out, and is about to be wrecked by some Ceph, but the Spire releases spores, and this time, they're lethal to Ceph. Alcatraz still dies here, and for the second time has to be resuscitated by the Nanosuit defibrillated. Following that, the group escapes. On their way out, they learn Gould couldn't evacuate. The train he was riding on was derailed by Ceph, and everyone is stuck. So the only option is Hargreave. Finally, it's time to infiltrate the prism. The aircraft can't land on water, so Alcatraz instead just airdrops into the water near the prism. Before we even get onto land, Hargreave informs that Lockhart, in his stupid, rebellious rogue rage, occupied the entire island, and it's crawling with Cell. So it's high time for some classic man on Nanosuit action, and gotta say, man is losing in this fight. Alcatraz is relentless, eliminating every single Cell person on the island. Before he gets to Lockhart though, Hargreave reveals there's an EMP trap set by Lockhart, designed to knock out the Nanosuit and make Alcatraz easily killable. So Alcatraz instead sabotages the nearby power station to turn off the EMP trap, circling around in his sewer system to sneak behind enemy lines and wasting some Cell soldiers. Finally, Lockhart is in sight, and he doesn't provide much resistance. For a villain that's been built up for the majority of the game so far, and even one wielding the Gauss rifle, Lockhart goes out like a chump. There's no challenge, there's no cat and mouse play, there's no fight to the death. He just gets thrown out the window in the most anticlimactic finish of all time. Sure, it's kinda satisfying to finally see him bite the dust, but he goes out like a complete non-factor, even less of a threat than regular Cell soldiers. What a waste of character. But now that he's dead, there's nothing stopping Alcatraz from meeting Hargreave. Except it turns out to be a double cross. Hargreave himself has set up an EMP trap for Alcatraz, and the Nanosuit is disabled, while Alcatraz is captured and transported to a skinning facility to have his Nanosuit stripped. Hargreave himself plans to wear the Nanosuit to battle Ceph, and the entire game up to this point was just Alcatraz training and improving Nanosuit with Ceph DNA to give it a chance to evolve into an anti-Ceph superweapon. And now Alcatraz is here, and the Nanosuit is primed for removal. While all of this is happening, Alcatraz is once again hallucinating Prophet's memories. And this time around, all of the truth is finally revealed. Hargreave was aware of the Ceph for ages, and from the very start the Nanosuits were developed to battle them. The entire point of Lingshan Island operation was to familiarize the Nanosuits with Ceph and their technology, to start the evolution of the suit. Hargreave needed the Nanosuit warriors to fight the Ceph, and he didn't care if they died in the process. He turned them into post-human warriors, half dead and half alive. During the skinning process, the consciousness of the suit wakes up. It's a living, sentient thing, and it resists the skinning process. Unexpectedly, Tara Strickland comes in and guns down all the Cell personnel. She reveals she's actually an undercover CIA operative that infiltrated Cell, and has been the one who ordered the Alcatraz's team to come and pick up Gould and Prophet before they all got destroyed at the start of the game. She also affirms that Hargreave stole alien technology from Tunguska 100 years ago and has been using it for his own needs. And as insane as he is, he's the only one with a plan to battle Ceph, so they do need him. She assigns Alcatraz to break into Hargreave's compound and capture him, so they could interrogate him later. So that's exactly what Alcatraz does. With all of his defenses broken and soldiers dead, Hargreave is pushed into the corner. With nowhere to go and nothing he can do, he reveals himself, a body suspended in a cold gel. That's right, Hargreave is barely alive. What's left of him is a withered body, and a computer system he uses to project his consciousness. That's how he's been alive for so long. That's why he's so familiar with Ceph and their technology. Not only did he reverse engineer what he stole in Tunguska to create a nanosuit, he also used the same technology to prolong his own existence. It's unclear how he planned to wear the nanosuit with his withered vegetative body, but now it doesn't matter. He has but one thing left to offer, the Tunguska iteration, the final, ultimate upgrade to the Nanosuit, an agent capable of improving the nanites of the suit to their absolute, most adaptive limits. This one upgrade is the key Nanosuit needed to turn into the ultimate weapon against Ceph, the one thing capable of reversing the function of Ceph bioweapon and turning it against its own creators. Alcatraz is knocked out again, and while he's out, the last memory of Prophet is played. The moment he learned Ceph were not only in Lingshan, they were all over the world all along, including New York. As Alcatraz wakes up, Gould is arguing with Hargreave, blaming him for knowing about Ceph for over a century, but not warning anyone. Hargreave reveals Ceph were original inhabitants of the Earth. They were here before humans, and now have come to claim back their world. Ceph attacked the facility, so Alcatraz has to escape. Hargreave sets up detonators around the complex, giving Alcatraz 10 minutes to escape before the island is wiped off the map. An escape he does with great haste. Hargreave made sure to inform what remains of Cell to assist Alcatraz, so they're not an issue anymore. The only real enemy left is Ceph, and everyone is fighting them. It's an all-out war. Alcatraz manages to make it to the bridge out of the island, but time's up, the prism detonates and the bridge crumbles, so Alcatraz once again gets close to death when a car literally smashes him in the face and knocks him out and into the water. But not all is lost. The Nanosuit accepts the Tunguska iteration, reaching maximum compatibility with the alien DNA. It's ready for deployment. Possibly as a side effect of that, the Nanosuit consciousness fully awakens, taking on the personality of the Prophet. As Alcatraz is washed ashore, Gould and Tara pinpoint his location with a tracker and pick him up. We're in the endgame now. All that's left is to reach the central Ceph structure at Central Park and reconfigure the alien spores to wipe out Ceph. It's the heart of alien invasion, so resistance is sure to be heavy. So Tara gets Barkley to help out and send air support. Barkley can't promise anything, as he's trying to reason with the Pentagon for planning to nuke the city to get rid of Ceph, but he'll try to assist. Ceph ambush forces the group to split, with Tara and Gould getting attacked by Ceph gunships, while Alcatraz is left alone to deal with several dozen Ceph. With the ultimate Nanosuit, it proves an easy challenge. Barkley sent air support, but they need Alcatraz to designate the targets, so he battles his way through a skyscraper before painting the Ceph gunships for an airstrike. With that problem blown to Kingdom Come and feeling a mortal enemy in Alcatraz, the Ceph hive reacts. It lifts up a huge chunk of Central Park, including the section with the central hive into the air in a pretty damn impressive scene. The way it blacks out the sun is just perfect, and the earthquake combined with almost hysterical confusion in the voices of Gould, Tara, and Barkley just improve on the scene immensely. Finally, after an entire game, Ceph show the power of their technology. So the only option is to go into the park and reach the spire. Aircraft can't get close, so Alcatraz is dropped off at the edge and has to fight his way through. At least initially, it looks pretty damn impressive. Alien tentacles coming out of the ground everywhere, ripping the surface to pieces, chunks of earth falling beneath your feet, and groups of aliens roaming the fields. Sadly, the glory fades relatively quickly. All this level entails is a few firefights with cover and explosives, and destroying 3 alien spore spikes. It's exactly the same concept as the level you played like 4 hours ago, except this time it's with a different background. And the most stupid part is that you can stealth around and literally skip like half the fights. Neat. Amazing. So fun. Anyway, Alcatraz makes his way through the park, blowing some aliens, shooting others, and causing all kinds of chaos and destruction. The goal is to disable 3 spikes, controlling some weird chains or tentacles or whatever. Only then will the final location open. But I got to say, for a last mission in the game, it's insanely easy. It looks awesome, and the area is perfect for some tremendously impressive and immersive action, but it just never happens. It's just a regular shoot, run, activate before you can access the last area of the game. And the game is so cracked, it actually dares to introduce a new enemy here. You heard me right. 120 seconds before it ends, the game introduces a new type of Ceph, the Guardian. The only interesting thing about it is the ability to cloak just like the Nanosuit can. That is all of the unique features they have. Seriously, aside from cloak, they're just close-range melee fighters you could deal with by shooting a lot, or using like one rocket from the rocket launcher. There's only 4 of them, and this is literally the only place you interact with them in the whole 6 or so hour-long game. What a letdown. Dealing with the Guardians and some more regular Ceph, Alcatraz enters the central spore hive, and the Nanosuit interacts with it, rewriting and reconfiguring the spores. At least it looks really damn cool. Alcatraz, a man one step removed from death, sacrificing what's left of his existence, stumbling into the heart of Ceph rage and fury, with nanoparticle storm raging ahead of him, an ominous red light flashing everywhere, Nanosuit burning up from the heat, and hurricane winds resisting his every step. It was almost like walking into Mount Doom from the Lord of the Rings or something, a really damn impressive scene. All the camera shakes really give this moment a sense of gravitas and importance. The Ceph are so strong, Alcatraz can't stand and has to crawl to the edge. In the last moments before jumping to what is certain death, the suit speaks to Alcatraz. It has fully taken on the personality of the Prophet. It even refers to itself as I. This is the end of the road. This is the final jump, the final sacrifice, at least for Alcatraz. In his last moments, Alcatraz sees a vision of Prophet explaining everything. From Hargreave, he learned about the suit, what it does, and what its purpose is. He tried to stop the Ceph, but by the time of invasion, he was already infected with the virus, spent, used up, a dead man walking. But all of it is connected. Living on borrowed time, Prophet learned that Ceph were everywhere, all over the world, and have been for a long time. But by then the time was up, he couldn't do anything. But Alcatraz was right there, dying in front of him. So Prophet chose to pass the Nanosuit and the hope for the survival of human race on to him. He gave Alcatraz his life and his purpose. The last words spoken by the Nanosuit are assimilation complete. Then the changed nanospores are released, wiping out all Ceph life. Humanity has won, for now. But assimilation also means the end of Alcatraz, as his body becomes one with the Nanosuit. He becomes something less than human, but also something more, a post-human warrior, a prophet. Man, what an epic story. With some tumbles and falls, but still, it's epic as hell. It's clear writers try to come up with something impressive and deep, especially since the story in the original Crysis was shallow as hell. But here, the story is infinitely better. It just makes much more sense, is much more ingrained into the events, and much more serious. And the core of it all is the sacrifice. Prophets, Hargreaves, Terra's Goulds, but most importantly, Alcatraz's. Everyone lost something in Manhattan. The price of victory was high, but it had to be done. One point I found really interesting is how the story switched from Ceph to the Nanosuits. In the first game, and even for a good half of Crysis 2, it was all about the Ceph, the threat they posed, and the plight of their invasion. But in the end, it all became about Nanosuit, and by extension Prophet. Nanosuit, which was just a generic power-up in the first game, is the deepest and most impressive plot device Crysis series could ever have. A sentient, evolving, enhancing parasitic organism based on alien technology bound to human flesh. What a crazy idea. Even if some other aspects of Crysis 2 suck in one way or another, the Nanosuit is easily its shining star. All the clues scattered through the game, pointing at truth. That weird bodysuit Prophet was in at the start of the game, which he wore to prevent the Nanosuit from growing into his flesh. The fact he chose to give Alcatraz the suit without the protective layer, knowing full well the suit would assimilate into his body. The fact the Nanosuit is imprinted with memories, emotions, and consciousness of Prophet, and even his rage towards the Ceph. The fact Hargreave knew about the suit and its effects, but instead chose to remain silent and sacrifice everyone in order to save the world from Ceph. There are just so many plot points, all converging on the suit, it's kinda crazy. Playing Crysis 2 while paying attention is so gratifying at that eureka moment when you finally figure out all the pieces and everything clicks together in your mind. The only actual real downside of the story is the lack of a final boss. Crysis 2 is the only game in the series without a boss fight. Crysis, Warhead, and Crysis 3 all had some sort of a boss battle at the end, but Crysis 2 has none. Well, there are those 4 guardians you encounter, but personally, I don't even consider them a boss fight. They feel like slightly stronger regular enemies, but definitely not anywhere near what one could consider a boss. Lack of a boss fight really robs the story of that last big impact it otherwise could have had, but hey, at least we got that point with Nanosuit, so I guess that's cool. Overall, the story is pretty damn good. Some people may say the plot of the game is less important than gameplay, but Crysis 2 is the absolute shining example of a plot done like 90% right, to the point where it elevates quite mediocre gameplay into new stellar heights. But some people don't care about the plot, and some people might have skipped all of the cutscenes and only came for the gameplay. So let's talk about that. Gameplay is mediocre. It really is nothing special. Literally, the entire game is focused on go here, do this, shoot, 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 repeat. That's every single mission, and every single goal in a mission. Sure, it's an FPS, and the FPS part is done well, but it severely lacks variety. Running and shooting, even if it was done in the best way possible, still gets quite stale after a while, but in terms of gameplay, running and shooting are the only things Crysis 2 has to offer. But let's start with the better side of mediocre. The movement and the Nanosuit. While in the original Crysis, everyone used the old version of Nanosuits, Nanosuit 1.0. In Crysis 2, it's the ultimate Nanosuit, the version 2.0. And for the most part, it's pretty damn good. It's intuitive, it's easy to use, it's fun to look at. Armor mode is almost completely unchanged from previous games, except here it uses way less energy and is much more durable. Seriously, in Crysis 2, death is a rarity. You will only die either if you're severely, and I do mean severely outnumbered, or if you get distracted and don't pay attention. Energy pool is massive, armor is very resistant, and what's more, switching to armor mode is instant. Armor and cloak have been bound to hotkeys, so there isn't any need to open the Nanosuit selector wheel. In fact, it doesn't even exist. So switching between modes is instant, so you can react to basically any situation the game throws at you. Stealth mode is also almost unchanged, except now it's considerably more energy efficient, so it can be used for longer. But the enemies can still see you from up close, so it's better to sneak around at a distance. However, it's now much easier to be stealthy, and that's entirely because stealth is bound to a hotkey. No more opening menu and switching abilities. Now you can quickly enter and exit stealth, just for that one moment it takes to take a shot. But aside from pure stealth reasons, you're also encouraged to flip stealth, because every gun that isn't a pistol will drain your suit energy almost instantly the moment you make a shot. Regular pistol is the only gun in the game you can shoot multiple times without breaking stealth, but it's weak, the range is not that good, and it's just not satisfying in a Crysis game. Shooting with a sniper rifle is infinitely better, but because it drains stealth, the best strategy possible is to leave stealth, take a shot, then immediately cloak again while the gun reloads. It's pretty damn fun, especially when fighting humans in big, open spaces. But the biggest change are the power and speed modes. They're completely gone, or rather assimilated into a new mode, and it doesn't need activation. This time it's automatic. Speed activates automatically when you sprint. Strength activates automatically while performing certain actions. And this is where the big problem occurs. Even if before these were separate modes, switching with the selector wheel was easy and fast once you got used to it. The speed of mode switch was never an issue, even on hardest difficulty modes. But separate modes meant more situation awareness, more decision making, and more strategic play. You could decide, do you want to spend energy on armor, or would you rather have more speed? Would you rather punch hard, or be invisible? It was fun to make those decisions. You felt cool and tactical and futuristic. But now, those decisions are made for you. Speed mode is butchered. It uses less energy than before, so you can sprint for longer, but it's almost never useful. Not only is the sprint speed vastly lower than before, and it feels just like a regular sprint in other games, but maps in Crysis 2 are tiny, never big enough to even utilize it. The first game in Warhead took place on an island, full of large, open spaces that you often either had to, or at least had the option to traverse on foot. On many maps, there were either multiple objectives or multiple ways to approach an objective. Base movement speed was very low, but speed mode increased both base movement speed and the sprint speed, so it was fun to use on those large open maps. You didn't even have to sprint. The base movement speed in speed mode was higher than sprinting in armor mode, so even by merely switching to speed mode, you were already faster. But Crysis 2 takes place entirely in a city, with narrow streets filled with objects like buses and barricades, so most you sprint for 2 to 3 seconds at a time, which is about as long as the previous speed mode lasted, except now it feels slow. That's not even considering the fact that previously speed mode also accelerated stuff like gun reloads and movement while prone. Now that is also gone, but strength is even more butchered. If previously you could use it to stabilize your shots, throw stuff really far, or fling enemies around, now it's dumbified and simplified. There are only contextual actions like kicking a car or grabbing an enemy, and every single power action uses all of the energy. Forget punching people in the face, forget throwing explosive barrels across the field. Now it's just kick, which is entirely useless except if you go out of your way to line up targets with kickable objects, and grab, which is only useful on aliens. It's just not as fun. Gun stabilization still exists, but this time it's unrelated to power mode, and to activate it you hold a sprint button while aiming. And the fun part is the game literally never tells you this. Some functions that previously were assigned to power mode now are taken over by armor. Actions like ripping turrets off is faster in armor mode than when in regular state. But again, the game never tells you this. You just stumble upon it accidentally and either notice it or no. Other stuff like increased jumps are still here, but they activate automatically. Fun stuff. Overall, while base movement speed is higher than before, Nanosuit 2.0 feels less of an upgrade, more like a side grade. Maybe version 1.75 at most. If Nomad was a slow-walking but stealthy glass cannon who could sprint at lightning speed, Alcatraz is a mobile tank, but without any boost. The amount of damage you soak up in Crysis 2 would turn Nomad into paste, and yet it feels less interesting and less challenging. It's just less. Nanosuit is streamlined and more intuitive, but it's also less interesting and more generic. It's just not the same. It feels like the complexity of the Nanosuit gameplay was sacrificed for streamlined approachability for consoles. The suit upgrades don't help. The upgrades are unlocked with the Alien Catalyst, collected from dead Ceph. There are 4 branches, with the lowest upgrades being the cheapest, but more advanced upgrades get more and more expensive, with some bordering on insanity. But it just so happens those starting upgrades are like the best upgrades and are the only ones worth using. First tier gives a threat tracer, which shows origin and the direction of incoming attacks, and is by far the most useful ability in the entire game. This makes finding the enemy that much easier. Coincidentally, it's the first upgrade unlockable in the story mode. Proximity Alarm and Cloak are obtainable way later, and are both worse. While Proximity Alarm could be useful at some point and is relatively cheap, the Cloak Tracker is a downright stupid ability. It reduces the effectiveness of enemy cloaks and costs 16,000 nano catalyst. So, you need to kill 160 regular Ceph aliens to get it. Or just be saving up all of the catalyst you get from battling all the Ceph aliens throughout the game, and before the end, you might be able to afford it. And all it does is make a texture appear on cloaked enemies, so you can see them better. And let me remind you, there's only 4 of them in the entire game, and you fight them literally at the last moments of the game. And it's not like they're all that impossible to see anyway. So it's a ridiculously expensive upgrade that is only useful exactly once, and to afford it, you'd have to sacrifice most of the other upgrades. Wow, amazing. Neat. The other upgrade paths aren't too much better, but at least they're somewhat useful. Armor upgrade path provides armor enhancement at lowest level, which reduces energy drain in armor mode. Absolutely worth getting for those more intense firefights. Nano recharge accelerates health and energy regeneration, so it's certainly quite useful, and deflection just straight up doubles the effectiveness of armor mode. Not entirely necessary, but still a nice perk. It's a whole 25% cheaper than that cloak tracker nonsense. It could be used for a decent chunk of the game. Awesome stuff. Third path is the same as the first, just less drastic. Modules are less useful. Only the first one is worth getting. Mobility enhancement reduces energy expenditure while jumping and sprinting and increases ledge grab speed. If you want to climb and run around, that's the best upgrade you could ever ask for. Air friction and air stomp are the other two upgrades, and both are pointless. Air friction increases control mid-air, which basically just means Alcatraz automatically performs a second jump few seconds after getting into the air. Effectively, it's a double jump, and it's nearly completely useless. The best possible effect it has is reducing damage from falls, but in Crysis 2, 99.97% of time is spent planted on the ground, so double jump is literally never useful unless you specifically go out of your way to fall off tall stuff. Air stop is cool in theory, a shockwave capable of instantly killing certain enemies, but after using it once you'll completely forget about it. To ever use it, you either have to already be above the enemy and literally fall on them, or jump mid-fight. And even then, the range on the shockwave is puny and damage is hilariously sad, only able to kill regular cell soldiers, but none of the aliens on even the easiest difficulty, in addition to the whole setup being quite slow to set up, certainly much slower than just shooting the enemies or grabbing them by the neck and throwing into stuff. And not only that, the shockwave drains you of literally all the energy, and if that wasn't bad enough, for a few moments after you do it, you're basically immobilized, can't shoot or do anything. So after going the extra mile to get either close enough for a jump or above the enemy for the fall, you perform the stomp, either miss entirely or hit but still don't defeat anyone, and now you're completely exposed for a few seconds, unable to shoot and have no energy for armor. Sweet, cool, amazing. The stealth tree is much more interesting, but also for the most part kind of pointless. Covert Ops is the first option, and it reduces footstep noise when upright. I guess it's cool if you want to sneak past enemies unseen, but most of the time you're crouched while moving to save energy, so you're already silent enough that most enemies will never notice you unless you're literally next to them. In all other situations, when you're cloaked, you're so far away from enemies. The noise reduction is completely pointless. But hey, it doesn't hurt to have it. Footstep tracker reveals enemy footprints, and that is just completely pointless for most people. Binoculars exist, and all enemies can be tagged to constantly be revealed on the minimap and have markers on the actual screen, so there's no way to get ambushed or ever need any additional information like footprints. I guess if you roleplay and specifically go out of your way to avoid using binoculars for added immersion, it's a useful skill, but realistically nobody is going to bother doing that. So stealth enhancement is probably the only actually useful upgrade, significantly reducing energy usage while cloaked, but even it is sort of pointless since energy drain in Crysis 2 is already massively lower than in original games, and there's basically no situations where you need to stay cloaked for that long anyway. Crysis 2 is just not that kind of a game. It's an action shooter, not a stealth simulator like Dishonored or Splinter Cell. So out of 12 possible upgrades, only 6 are worth using in general. 3 of those are in the armor upgrade path, and 3 out of 6 worthwhile upgrades are all the very first upgrades unlocked in their respective paths. To say the system hasn't been designed properly is an understatement. Upgrades matter so little. You can beat the entire game without using either one, and it will be only marginally harder. I mean, sure, it's mostly a story-driven single-player FPS, which is also quite short and quite easy, so there's no need for any upgrades in general, but at that point they could have just made the threat tracker, armor, and mobility enhanced part of default Nanosuit feature set, and just remove the upgrade system entirely. In its current state, the upgrade system at best adds very minor improvement to the gameplay experience. At worst, it's completely pointless. It's not helped by the enemies either. In the first Crysis, most of the players at the time praised human enemies and hated aliens. The reasoning was human enemies were much more challenging, interesting, and enjoyable to fight, while aliens were just generic floating blobs introduced after 2/3 of the game, after the most interesting part was already over and all the mystery was gone. Well, in Crysis 2, that mystery doesn't even exist at all, but the same problem persists. Aliens are just boring. They look cool and menacing, and they are encountered way earlier in the game, but conceptually, they're exactly the same as humans, just slightly more varied and with a larger health pool. Seriously, they even use the exact same battle tactics, except they're worse in every way. Human enemies at least seem logical. They use group tactics, hide behind cover, and try to suppress you with gunfire. They're never a real challenge, but they're regular humans, so you never expect them to be anything else. But aliens also hide behind covers, seem to use group tactics, and try to suppress you with gunfire. Except when they hide behind cover, they expose their weak spots, and even despite them often grouping up and having large health pool, they're still easy to kill. While they have weak spots on their backs, there's never a need to use that. Shooting them directly works well with any gun, and if you obtain a sniper rifle, they're as easy to headshot as regular humans. No special tactics are required to beat them, no special equipment, and no strategy. At least in previous games you had to use a Gauss rifle, as it was the only weapon dealing enough damage to be efficient against aliens. But here, any rifle works as well as any other rifle, with the exception of the sniper, which is by far the best weapon against anything due to its damage output. Even the Devastators, the most powerful Ceph besides the Guardians, can be taken down by pure headshots from snipers, or like 2 grenades and a clip of ammo from a regular assault rifle. No strategy needed at any point. The only, and I do mean the only Ceph enemies that can't be dealt with swiftly and easily by using a sniper rifle are commander variants and pingers. Pingers simply have too much health, and most of the time are destroyed with rockets and explosives, and commanders are those annoying Ceph with red shields around them that regenerate shield faster than sniper rifle can shoot, so by the time you get the shield down, you've got to reload the rifle, which allows them to put up the shield again or run away. But in that situation, you can just unload a full clip with basically any automatic rifle at them, destroying both their shield and them in the process. So it also doesn't even stink of a strategy. What's even worse, Ceph AI was clearly either completely or mostly copied from regular human AI. But while for normal human NPCs the AI scripting works well, Ceph have additional abilities that completely break stuff like pathfinding. The biggest culprit is the ability to jump. All regular Ceph infantry can leap to significant heights, jumping over obstacles or quickly scaling buildings. It sounds impressive and dynamic, but what it usually means is the Ceph will jump somewhere, try to path to a location, but because pathing wasn't designed with 3-dimensional movement in mind, the Ceph will just get stuck in an animation, in a texture, or in a dimensional plane. And not like it is a rare occurrence. It happens literally all the time, and 99% of time, it happens specifically to Ceph. Human enemies also derp out from time to time, but very rarely, but Ceph are brain dead like all the time, every time. It's just so incredibly disappointing to have such a damn cool race as Ceph be such a non-factor. The story builds them up as this mega threat to all life, with them being much more powerful and advanced than humans, to the point where Nanosuit soldiers are the only saviors, and regular humans have no chance. And yet, at every opportunity, it feels exactly the opposite. Ceph gunships are destroyed by regular jets and helicopters. Even the heaviest and most armored Ceph units like pingers and devastators are destroyed by regular gunfire, explosives, or fire from heavy machine gun, while regular grunts can be one-shot by a sniper. There's a section by the end where the convoy drives towards Central Park, and you actually get to use the turret of the armored transport to shoot the Ceph. Keep in mind, this is not a tank. This is a gun of considerably lower firepower than that on a tank, and yet all the Ceph are still immediately disintegrated. Regular Ceph, commanders, and devastators are all blown up to bits with literally no issues whatsoever. Like, how in the hell is humanity even losing this war? Nanospore virus aside, humans should be wiping the floor with Ceph. A battalion with heavy machine guns, few rocket launchers, and a jet on standby could destroy an entire army of Ceph with minimal difficulty. They're just so poorly designed it's laughable. At numerous points, it's not even worth shooting them and is easier and faster to just grab them by the neck and fling them into the near surface, which causes instant death. Man, what a joke. The absolute lack of challenge from Ceph destroys basically any tension there is, and the whole plot just feels kind of unnecessary. Even the Nanospore plot point is sort of moot. At numerous points in the game, there are showcases of what the alien virus does to humans. Walking through subways, evacuation shelters, or destroyed buildings, there's always bodies scattered around, dead or dying, in various stages of decomposition into pure biomass. It's built up as this absolutely lethal disease that nobody survives. Not even Prophet was able to escape it. And the one time the nanospores are shown during the explosive release from a spire, all nearby humans die instantly. But then like 15 seconds later, a group of soldiers come running in, seemingly completely immune to the virus, and start fighting Ceph. So is it fatal or not? Or is it only fatal as long as you don't have a filter? For seemingly insanely dangerous, incurable alien engineered disease, having an air filter protects you from all the possible effects, just removes all the danger it represents. So yeah, Ceph are messed up, really messed up from a certain point of view. They look cool and menacing, but the absolute lack of threat just makes them seem insanely small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Seems Crytek just can't create a decent alien to save their life. What they can create, however, is insane visuals. Crysis games have always looked amazing, with certain moments bordering on photorealism. Warhead improved upon it, and looked even better with the same style, but vastly more vibrant colors and new frosty aesthetic, and Crysis 2 continues the improvement. Even the original Crysis 2, released in 2011, still looks breathtaking. Vibrant colors, sharp textures, and sleek UI really hold up even now, 13 years later. It just feels new and modern, and still as futuristic as it did all those years ago. The remastered version that came out in 2021 skyrockets the visual fidelity even further with stuff like new illumination systems, ray tracing support, fine-tuned light reflection, and higher fidelity textures. But even without all that, Crysis 2 looks insanely good. Everything you look at is of the highest fidelity possible, not a blurry texture in sight. Fire, smoke effects, water ripples. All of it looks incredible, even today. Everything bleeds quality and care. Not a single thing sticks out as cheap or unpolished. Every area is atmospheric as hell. Every square meter of every level is as close to perfection as any game could ever get to in 2011. Crytek invested lots of time into developing intricate lighting and shadow systems, and it shows. Dark hyper-dense shadows are contrasted by shining reflections of the sun and lights. For every underground kingdom of shrouding darkness, there's a paradise of shining, brilliant heavenly light. For every city block of cold concrete and blinding blast, there's a lush and inviting weald of nature. Light is particularly impressive. Light isn't just a texture, it's a cascading volumetric entity. It wraps around objects and buildings, illuminating the abundance of volumetric effects like smoke, mist, and vapor, and combines with the immensely intricate particle systems to create an insanely good-looking fiesta of cinematic greatness. Nothing is ever allowed to compromise the pure eyegasm. Nothing ever feels outdated, hollow, or incomplete, like it sometimes did in the original Crysis. Even despite the fact that under the hood some technologies got a downgrade since Crysis 1 and Warhead to make Crysis 2 run better on consoles, There's more than plenty of new stuff introduced with DirectX 11 to make up for it. New additions like tessellation, complex shadow variation systems, high dynamic range post-processing, and other new additions introduced in API upgrades in the years since Crysis and Warhead really add up to turn Crysis 2 into an immense graphical achievement. And it easily trades punches with the best-looking games even today. Every single frame is a wallpaper. Every new area is an assault on the eyes in the best way possible. It's easy to make a good-looking game, especially in modern times with modern game engines and new technologies, but in some ways we're still struggling to get to a point where Crysis 2 was 13 years ago. Of all the things Crysis 2 did well, graphics is where it excels over everything else. It might not be the absolute best graphics of all time, but it certainly is up there with stuff like Cyberpunk and Horizon Zero Dawn, in some ways even exceeding its own successors like Crysis 3 or the Crysis 2 Remaster. Crytek really knocked it out of the park with the visuals, and they knew it. Crysis 2 is the first game I've ever seen that has a look button. That's right, a dedicated button just to glue your sight to something cool or impressive for a moment. It's the only function the button has, and it's glorious. One of the greatest yet least talked about features is the sleek and futuristic user interface. Bright, vibrant colors, streamlined design, and especially the dynamic movement really make it feel fresh and new, even if it's close to drinking age in some countries. In the original Crysis, the UI was static, muted, and monotone, with the only vibrancy coming from informational bars like health and energy. It did what it had to, and it did it well, but compared to UI in Crysis 2, the original feels decrepit, archaic, and tired. It did feel futuristic and interesting in those low-resolution teaser pictures back in like 2005, especially compared to everything else that was out there at the time, but these days it just feels like a relic from decades ago that's just outdated and outshined by its new cool, shiny, vibrant successor. The updated UI is just much more streamlined, immersive, and futuristic. It's completely dynamic, reacting to every move or vibration. It's vibrant and bright, popping out of the screen in almost three-dimensional fashion. It's a small but incredibly well-designed update on pre-existing tech. I mentioned Crysis 2 Remaster a few times before, and it's probably the best time to talk about it a bit. Most of the footage shown so far, with the exception of the section about graphics, was recorded on the Remaster. And there's a simple reason for that. It's the version that's readily available out there on platforms like Steam, and it's also the version that's easier to run on modern systems. The original Crysis 2 sometimes gets delisted from online platforms, and depending on your system, is also harder to run reliably. And the Remaster adds support for new and exciting features, like ray tracing and much better light and shadow systems. Shadows are more realistic. Light areas are less blown out and feature new global illumination system. Colors are warmer, with cold blue and orange filter of the original replaced by more natural and in some places dimmer colors. Bloom and lens flares are reduced and adjusted to be much more realistic. Water systems and reflections are also improved to be much more realistic and impressive, with reflections now being real-time ray traced. Overly bloomy colors have also been adjusted, so the whole picture looks slightly lighter and more realistic, but less colors pop up in artificial, unnatural ways. Most of the textures are less detailed, but of much higher resolution. Motion blur and depth of field effects are slightly reduced. Overall, it does look slightly better, but comes with certain flaws. It's certainly a change, but depending on who you ask, it might be either good or bad, and the only way to decide is to play both versions and compare. One thing that remains the same in both versions is the music. And let me tell you right now, the soundtrack in Crysis 2 kicks some serious ass. Most songs are great on their own, but there are a few that are particularly amazing. Few tracks that perfectly embody the horror of alien invasion and the violence of fight for life, the struggle for survival of the species, and the undying resilience of humankind. Check this out. All of these tracks are amazing. All of them are great in their own right. And together they create one of the best soundtracks the FPS world has ever seen. But there is one theme that stands above all others. The ultimate achievement of musical score composition. The one track that makes Crysis 2 more than just another shooter. The one track that places it among the shining legends of gaming. Epic. Simply epic. Crysis 2 is a result of immense ambitions, improving upon everything that the original did, while getting modernized and streamlined for consoles, a media that's vastly inferior to PC when it comes to fast-paced first-person shooters. It continues a story from the original that most people had either completely forgotten or never learned in the first place. It's still ahead of its time even now 1.5 decades after it was released. It's still as futuristic as it has ever been, and is not likely to change anytime soon. But just like the key idea of its story, Crysis 2 had to make sacrifices. Some of them were inevitable, some of them avoidable. Making it more accessible on consoles hurt its complexity. Streamlining the gameplay made it less tactical and more boring. Trying to mess with the Nanosuit resulted in an upgrade system that was decent in theory, but horrible in execution. Trying to make Ceph look cooler neutered their threat. But even with all these flaws, Crysis 2 is still a masterpiece. It's still in a league of its own. It's still beyond everything else of the time, and is going to remain among the greatest video games forever. So go play it. Play and savor it. It's worth it.